A warm welcome. I'm Catherine Mudford, Director of Capability Development at AsiaLink Business, Australia's National Centre for Asia Capability, mandated by the Commonwealth Government, and for the last 10 years working with business and industry to create an Asia-capable Australian workforce. Before today's briefing, I did want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are present today. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Today's discussion explores the question, are we match fit for Asia? Thank you all for the questions that you've submitted ahead of time as you registered, and we look forward to discussing those. Our discussion is going to be followed by an introduction to the AsiaLink Business Academy. I'm delighted to be joined today by Prerana Mehta, Head of Global Growth at Australia's National Science Agency, CSIRO. Prerana is a senior executive with a depth of global experience in government, not-for-profit, private sector and startup organisations. She's been focused on technology in critical and emerging growth sectors. Previously, Prerana was the Deputy CEO and Chief of Ecosystem Development with AusCyber, and prior to that led Austrade's operations in promoting trade and investment opportunities from Australia to the ASEAN region. Prerana, it's a delight to have you with us. And I'm looking forward to really hearing your perspectives on whether we are match fit for Asia. Could I invite you, Prerana, to start with perhaps a short overview of CSIRO and your portfolio? As we know, CSIRO is Australia's National Science Agency, established more than 100 years ago, and for nearly a century has been improving the lives of people everywhere with science. But what are some of the key trends in Asia that impact on your agenda, particularly in the context of your role focused on global growth?
Thank you, Catherine, for the question. It's lovely to be here in, I think, the AsiaLink family, I've got to call it. So thank you so much for inviting me. Look, I'm hoping that today I can share a little bit about both my experience, but also what CSIRO is looking to do in Asia. And maybe starting with your question about who are we and what we do, it's a great question. We are a large organisation. We are actually probably one of the world's largest multi-disciplinary science and research organisations, where we do everything, and we're quite unique because there's not really another organisation like us internationally. Our focus is around tackling complex global issues and making sure that we've got Australia as our #1 priority in doing that, but really focusing on international challenges that we need to partner with other people with and other countries to be able to deliver on those. We've got about 2,500 partners across 80 countries, so that's pretty huge. We have teams that are based across 6 countries, and they really act as hubs across the region. So we've got a fabulous team based in Vietnam, Indonesia, Singapore, and they really act across the Asian region as much as possible. And their role is to bridge science and technology and innovation between Australia and the rest of the world. We work really closely with industry, with government, with partners such as AsiaLink, SMEs, startups and entrepreneurs across the world to be able to really focus in on our challenges. And we have 6 challenges that we're focusing on: food security and quality, sustainable energy and resources, health and well-being, resilient and valuable environments, and environments is very big, future industries, and that includes things like cybersecurity, quantum and AI. And then the last challenge is a secure Australia and the region, and that one sits really across the other 5 challenges as well. So we are a challenge-based organisation. And I think maybe the last thing to say around CSIRO and our focus is that we are very much mindful of the Australian government's agenda of looking to Asia and the Indo-Pacific. It is recognising that, Australia sits within a region that's one of the fastest growing in the world, and therein lies our opportunity to be able to partner collaboratively and complementary ways with many of our countries overseas. And we really see ourselves as a key player and a leader in driving innovation, particularly around things like the circular technologies that transition into the new energy economies as well.
Mm. Look, I look forward to delving into a few of those challenges particularly, but perhaps we might build off what you are seeing in the region firsthand, Prerana, because in recent months, we've definitely seen that renewed effort by the Australian government and Australian businesses to build relationships and really pursue trade and investment opportunities across the region. You've recently spent time in Vietnam and in Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
What are you noticing as you spend more time back in market?
Look, there's a couple of trends that I'm seeing as well. Maybe the first one is maturity in the region. So we're seeing a lot of the countries fast, but like they're so fast in their kind of increased, accelerated technology ownership and how they're kind of approaching some of these problems that we're facing here in Australia, and they've got a very different perspective and they're approaching it from a very different way. And I think there's a lot for us to learn in that. There's also a lot of similarities. So our race towards, I guess, embracing renewable energy solutions, we're seeing that a lot in Asia. I was in Vietnam, as you mentioned earlier, and I was really blown away by the level of commitment that the government had. And that means investing in their own technology, investing in their business, investing in infrastructure that supports that energy transition to happen, for example. India's another economy that I'm going to in the next couple of months, but we've got a couple of large programs in South Asia, and constantly really amazed at the level of investment, passion, and energy that both government and industry have towards really moving towards the challenges in their own country. So how can we best, find those complementarities, and how can we best collaborate? My favourite has to be talent and diversity. The major labour force is over 340 million people in the region. But my favourite stat that's come out recently is the number of female entrepreneurships in Southeast Asia. Women comprise between, I think, 12 and 21% of the region's total entrepreneurs, and that's compared to a global average of about 8%. So they are leading the way. And 5 out of 9 self-made women billionaires are from Asia. So how can we really work with that diversity and talent to be able to partner better in the region? There's so many other experiences. I think in Singapore, I used to live and work in Singapore, and I'm always thrilled by the way that they approach strategically what is important for their country, and where they will partner with other countries. They're incredibly open-minded. They're incredibly receptive of working with Australia, and I think I would say that is true pretty much of every country in Southeast Asia. And then maybe the other thing that I'm seeing is some of the smaller Southeast Asian countries, particularly in the ASEAN region and the Mekong Delta, they're leapfrogging when it comes to technology. They're not having to play catch up. They're actually building infrastructure that supports a leapfrog, where they're not having to wait because they're just so new. They can just do their own thing. And I think that's something for us to learn there as well. I could go on and on, but is that a sufficient summary?
I think that's a great start, and it's interesting, isn't it, when you think about what are some of the opportunities to tap into, and when you think about that diverse workforce, particularly that growth in female entrepreneurs, do we have the capability and the mindset, I guess, to think about how do we work differently on some of those partnerships to grow businesses and find different opportunities. Megan Cockcroft, who's the Senior Business Development Coordinator with the City of Melbourne, has sent in a question, and you've covered a broad range of countries that you're seeing opportunities in. Megan asks, which markets in Asia do you see currently hold the most potential for Australian engagement?
Oh, that's a hard one, Megan. I'd like to say all of them for different reasons, depending on what it is that you're looking at and looking to partner with them on. If we look at countries like, I guess, Indonesia, Vietnam, the Mekong region, they're a hotbed at the moment for things like infectious diseases. And so that's absolutely an opportunity for us to be able to work with them, because they want to be able to manage those infectious diseases, better in their country, understanding that they don't live in a bubble and that their shoreline and their seas sit next to another country. So we need to do that in collaboration. That, you know, that brings other opportunities as well, because I see some of the countries doing a lot of work around ending plastic waste and the circular economy, for example, because it's a massive issue for them, and they absolutely want to delve in deeper in those areas. I mentioned energy transition. I think seeing a lot of opportunity in energy transition across the board. There are some countries that are leading, so certainly Korea, Japan are leading the way in that area, and we're working with them very closely around some of those opportunities. And I think, I mentioned India already. I think, just I think it's difficult for me to say that one country is better than the other. I think it's actually all countries provide an opportunity. It really depends where we're looking and what you're interested in. I think that's me sitting on the fence there.
Oh no, I think you've summed it up beautifully, Prerana, because there are specific challenges, and in those challenges, opportunities in certain geographies. And so I guess what you were saying so succinctly is, clarity around the challenge in a certain country, whether that's the challenges that we're seeing around, the health challenges of certain parts of the Mekong, and how that links to a particular industry sector. So I guess having that sense of doing your homework, knowing what those challenges are, and being able to respond based on your own sector is important, as well as those universal challenges that you've mentioned around the energy transition. But also, I guess, that third point you made, which is certainly around, how do we understand who the leaders are in their fields in market, and what does that mean in terms of the kind of partnerships we might want to form, and how would we engage? So
Yeah,
brilliantly responded. Thank you for that. But I guess you do raise a really good point, which is, given this current context that we work in, it's a much more complex global landscape than it has been previously. There are certainly shifting geostrategic priorities, and you've referred to that in terms of your own agenda and needing to align with a national agenda. When you think about that, what are maybe perhaps some of the more significant challenges that CSIRO faces as you operate in the region, and how are you equipping your organisation for that changed landscape?
It's also incredibly fast paced at the moment. So what we're seeing is not that there's just changes geopolitically, but there's changes economically, and they're rapidly changing. And that what happens 12 months ago, it's a very different landscape to what we're looking at again in the next 12 months or currently. So I think one of the first challenges is understanding government policies, their ways of working, and what some of those trends are in the countries that we're working with. It's certainly keeping abreast of what's happening, who the leadership is, what are some of those regulatory barriers that we might be facing, what are some of those new changes in acts or laws that either make it easier or make it a little bit more difficult for us to do business, and how do we overcome those, right? Particularly, I think, as we're moving towards a slightly protectionist or a nationalistic, perhaps is the better way to frame it, for each country. We're all incredibly interested in our own sovereign capability. We're all incredibly mindful of supply chains and the security of those supply chains, whether that's future foods and food products, or whether it's energy or environment or health, you mentioned before as well. Maybe I think the second challenge is around size and diversity. It is, you mentioned it's a complex, diverse area, but it's critical to understand what those diversities are and what the differences of each of them are as well. Investment decisions need to be made around understanding culture, understanding the ways of working. Prior to joining the call, we were having a chat about Vietnam, and how Vietnam, even, North, South, and Central Vietnam could actually be three different countries completely, because the ways of working is very different. And so I think understanding that the size and diversity and the complexity, even within individual countries, is difficult to master, but it can be done. It's about doing your homework, and it is very much around, you know, building strong partnerships, being in market as much as possible. You can't do the fly in, fly out thing. We've tried, we were unsuccessful. And really the best way is to be able to be in market, build a team who are very closely engaged with those countries and have a deep, solid understanding of your sector, the business landscape and the government landscape. So that's probably how that challenge can be overcome.
And on that, Prerana, if you think about some of the efforts that CSIRO has undertaken in recent times to become more match fit for Asia, are you able to expand on a couple of those examples in terms of how you've been building that muscle?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll kind of build on that last point that I made, which is we've got science counsellors that we've put into countries that build that knowledge and specialist level of understanding, building those deep partnerships. So they're Australian-based individuals in Vietnam, Indonesia, Singapore. And they have an office of local staff who speak the language, understand the cultural differences and the nuances, and they've got their own amazing networks and own experiences that they're bringing to play. And that's something that we, sitting here in Australia, just simply do not have. So we depend on them incredibly. We've actually just started working with AsiaLink, actually over the last few years, and we've kind of nuanced programs as we've gone along around cultural capability, and better understanding Japan, I think, was the last one that we have. We've got India as well. So we offer it to all of our CSIRO staff. So we have 6,000 staff globally and within Australia. So we're constantly trying to build up, and build capability and knowledge for our staff, including our executive team. We use our diaspora within CSIRO too. So being an organisation with 6,000 people, we actually have a really large percentage of people who are not born in Australia as part of our workforce. And we lean on them quite a lot. We've done a fabulous little series where we've interviewed a lot of our Indian diaspora as part of our 50th anniversary celebrations with India last year. And we're doing a similar thing at the moment with our amazing scientists and research in Vietnam to be able to celebrate our partnership bilaterally as well. And they have networks and they have an understanding that they're just so proud to be able to share back to the country of their origin. So we absolutely use our science diaspora as much as possible. And then finally, I think we work with other government departments. So we really work together as one team. We try very hard to not just go in independently. We try and join the dots as much as possible to bring the best for ourselves, but also for the stakeholders and our partners that we work with as well. They don't want to be having one face. They'd like us to be, or they'd like to know that we're working across, for us, the government and industry ecosystem.
That's great. And Prerana, it's almost as if you anticipated a question that I'm just reading from Ash Kallick. He's a director of Growth Exchange, and he asks, at an enterprise level, what are the recommended paths to establish a presence in Asia? And particularly, what are some of the networks and partnerships that can be leveraged?
Look, there's a couple actually. I mean, I was previously trade commissioner as well, working with Austrade, and I would highly recommend, connecting with Austrade, connecting with your local state and territory representatives as well, because many of them have offices located overseas. They'll be able to provide you with the guidance, the know-how, the tools that you need to be able to set up and establish a presence, whatever that may be, whether it's an actual physical office or whether it's a virtual presence, but they'll have that know-how and knowledge that they'll be able to share with you. They'll give you the tips of the trade. I think tapping into your own networks as well. So, if you're with AsiaLink, you've got a network, an immediate network around you. So utilize that as much as possible. There's fantastic publications, so do the homework and be up to date. So really understand the industry landscape or the government landscape. There's a million podcasts there at the moment, so you can hone in on areas of interest for you. And I think that's a really important thing to do. It's I think it's just no longer good enough to read the paper. I think you really have to have a much deeper understanding of where you're going to be able to do that. So yes, use your networks, government included, and also at a state and territory level. I think they're fabulous.
Yeah, such great tips, Prerana. Thank you so much. And perhaps if I may then ask a final question on behalf of Angeline Acaria. Angeline is the Executive Director at Simplo, and she says, we've been doing business in Asia and with Asia for so long now. What's stopping us from being match fit?
Look, I think that's the key obstacle in a way, right? That we just can't seem to necessarily lean in. I think there's a couple of things. The first is maybe as a country, we don't tend to be incredibly strategic. I think we tend to run after shiny balls. And we tend to be a little bit reactive. So we get an inquiry and go, yeah, great opportunity. We wanted to work in that country anyway. Let's go after that. And I think if we were more strategic and we did a lot more planning, then we would be able to be a lot. I think we would be able to maximize our engagement better, more deeply. I think there seems to be a mismatch between being told to lean in and take the opportunity of Asia, but then you don't have the investment to follow. So I think there needs to be a commitment from both industry and government to be able to open those doors, but then commit to going through them. That doesn't necessarily mean always that it's going to be the money on the table kind of thing. I think it needs to be other ways that we can engage as well. So thinking a little bit more broadly rather than, well, we need money. That's the best way to go forward. I think we can do that in many different ways actually to be able to deepen engagements. And I think maybe the third thing in and around why we're not just getting there is we tend to keep that masquerade of, we really want to learn from Asia, but maybe we're just a little bit better. I think, if there's one takeaway in this, it's really, I think we're being left behind. I think Asia, particularly some Asian countries, are way ahead. And many of them will be overtaking Australia if we don't move forward quickly. So get off your bottoms and really invest and commit and plan and be strategic.
Anna, what a call to action. Thank you so much. Look, whenever we have a conversation together, it's always too short, but those insights, there's some real words that stand out in terms of, look, there's, this speed of pace, the diversity, the evolution that we're seeing in our own backyard, and yet our ability to kind of have a plan that lasts for the long term, think about the components of the plan, what we do, what we need to invest in, but also our mindsets around what we know and what we don't know yet, and how we might build that muscle for now. Fantastic insights and observations. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure.